Hi, I'm Ed Fuquay, the Young Adult Librarian here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
And I'm Miss Gabby from the Children's Department.
We're here to do another segment of Book Talking to talk about almost everything except books. We're here in the library in front of the giant wall of manga. Because it is May the 4th when we're filming this, which is sort of International Unofficial Star Wars Day, as in May the 4th be with you. We're here to talk about Star Wars.
Yay!
You like Star Wars?
I do, I love Star Wars.
Almost everybody seems to, more or less.
Oh, yeah.
What has been your Star Wars experience?
So when I was little, like maybe like 3-4 years old, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep unless I was watching Star Wars. So I had like the VHS tapes and everything of that. So my parents would always put it on and I would fall asleep to sounds of lightsabers and all that stuff. So it was a very interesting childhood.
So have you seen all the Star Wars movies?
Pretty much like the original ones, if anything. So what about you?
Yes, I was lucky enough, I'm old enough I should say, to see all the Star Wars movies in theaters when they were actually like new. Yeah, I know, I'm ancient. I was in high school when the first Star Wars movie came out,
Wow.
and then I was in college when the second one came out, and by the time the third one came out, I had already moved up here and was technically grown up, and running a small business. So I can, like many Star Wars fans, I can trace my entire life by Star Wars movies. Yeah, Star Wars is a giant phenomenon, a huge pop culture thing.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the recent ones, the most recent trilogy?
I think I saw the first one when like Rey first got like introduced, but I didn't really continue watching them.
Wow. Okay, that's sad.
A little bit.
Disney wants you to keep watching them, you know.
Yeah, I know that part, but I don't know. I just never really got around to them.
Yeah. Well, the first three films that were released are now called A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi.
Yes.
Originally, Star Wars wasn't called A New Hope, it was just called Star Wars, because at that time, Lucas couldn't even be sure he'd ever do another film, let alone another Star Wars film. And so the series has had its ups and downs over the years. So they did the 3 movies, then he went back and did the prequel movies. And the prequel movies, have you seen them?
Yes.
Many people liked them, many people didn't like them. There's a lot of divisive elements in them. It's a Star Wars and its huge fandom is a fascinating phenomenon that we'll get into at least a little bit. And then the most recent 3 movies, the last trilogy, which is 7, 8, and 9 in the series, has been even more divisive and has split fandom kind of down the middle, leaving Disney with more or less a quandary of what they're going to do with the franchise. There's 10 million commentators on YouTube and all over the internet talking about Star Wars and criticizing the movies and praising the movies, and almost no one seems to love the movies universally.
Mm-hmm.
They've created enough division that almost no one embraces them completely. The same way, like the middle trilogy, I guess we need to call it, almost everyone embraces completely. You can make your complaints about them, but almost everyone agrees that they're really good. I think one of the issues is that when Lucas was making those original 3 movies, he was just making movies. And he's a guy who loves movies. He grew up in Southern California. Movies are his thing. They're his passion. And so to a certain extent, they're the product of passion. They're made by people who love movies. Now, the people currently doing Star Wars still love movies, but now it's part of a corporate enterprise. It's part of a huge multinational conglomerate now, owned by one of the biggest companies in the world, Walt Disney. Disney Corporation has been very good to Star Wars, pumping money into it and that kind of thing. The quality of the product is really nice, but in a lot of ways, because they're a corporate entity, it's lost something that it used to have.
I feel like when like the original ones came out, there was like love put into it, I guess. But now I feel like it's more just like money instead of love.
Well, you can't just throw something on the screen anymore, and just when people like it, people don't like it. Who cares?
Yeah.
And these days, every single thing has to be analyzed to death because it will be analyzed to death.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways, Star Wars fans have kind of ruined it by analyzing every frame of footage and things like that, which can get really tedious really quickly. But again, there's so much to talk about. We'll probably be doing 2 segments.
Okay.
The same way we did with Harley Quinn.
Yes.
Because Harley Quinn was just one person, and we did 2 segments about her. This is like an entire universe we have to deal with here. Science fiction has that advantage over a lot of other film genres in that you can theoretically tell an infinite number of stories in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of habitable planets, there are 1,000 intelligent races, you have technology, you have ships, you have all these things traveling the universe. There are an infinite number of stories you can tell. Again, oddly, the scope is still very limited for some reason. Well, there are many things that we'll be getting into. And when you talk Star Wars, you're talking, of course, about the 9 movies, but you're also talking about the TV shows. Have you seen Clone Wars on TV?
Clone Wars, yes.
Okay, I have not seen that yet. We just got Disney Plus,
Okay.
so I'm getting caught up on all the things I haven't seen.
Oh yeah, Baby Yoda.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's from Mandalorian, which is, yeah, Mandalorian may be the first really super successful spin-off of Star
Yeah, it was
Wars.
good. It was
Yeah.
really good.
And it definitely proves how wide the universe is, that you can do a Star Wars story that doesn't involve a Jedi, doesn't involve someone in the Skywalker family, that still kind of feels like a real Star Wars story.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues that Disney and the creators have to deal with is, what is a Star Wars story? What makes a Star Wars story? There's a feeling for a long time that you couldn't do a Star Wars story that didn't involve Jedi fighting Sith. That was how you defined the Star Wars universe. And for a galaxy that's so large, that's a really limited way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So the Star Wars is the television shows, it's the movies, it is the comic books. There have been Star Wars comic books since virtually the beginning. Marvel Comics had the license for a long time. They lost it, and then Dark Horse picked it up. Dark Horse did a fantastic job with it. They were phenomenal. And then Marvel recently took it over again, because Marvel, by no mean coincidence, in Hollywood it's called synergy. Disney also owns Marvel, and they own Star Wars. So naturally, Marvel started putting out the Star Wars comics. And they're also doing a really good job. They've been reprinting some of the Dark Horse ones now with the Marvel imprint on them, which is,
Wow.
yeah, so something really rarely happens in the comic book world, because normally comic book companies are so totally separate from each other. But there's actually like Dark Horse produced material coming out under like the Marvel banner now.
Wow.
Because it's all Star Wars.
Yeah.
And Marvel has even licensed Star Wars to yet another comic book publisher to do another line of Star Wars one, which I haven't read. They're aimed more at younger audiences. Like the Star Wars Adventure line is coming out from a different company that's not branded as Marvel. If you're buying children's books, or you are a child yourself, you can get like Star Wars Golden books now.
I never heard of those.
Yeah, they're the ones for kids that have the golden spine on them. Yeah. When I was a kid, they were all over the place. They stopped printing them for a while. They made a comeback, mostly for nostalgia. But they're nice, simple little stories. And they're doing all kinds of like Star Wars Golden books now.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think there's virtually like no medium Star Wars hasn't conquered. There's a Star Wars radio series for a while on NPR. Yeah, they did like the first couple of Star Wars movies as radio plays. So again, there's literally no media that Star Wars hasn't touched upon, because this is called book talking. We should, in theory, be talking about books.
Yes.
I am sitting here in the library, and while you can like check out movies from your library, primarily our focus is on books. And the world of fiction and nonfiction in books has been huge for Star Wars. It has really made the Star Wars universe in a lot of ways. I have a theory that books were like the savior of Star Wars.
Why is that?
Well, I discovered in my research, this is the thing. So, Lucas did the first 3 movies, and then he stopped.
Yes.
Now, Lucas had an idea for 9 movies right from the get-go. But if you read interviews with him, it's pretty obvious he really didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't actually have the 6 other movies written out in script form sitting in a safe somewhere. He's just had ideas for a total of like 9 movies. So they did 3 movies, they were all super successful, and then some time passed, and nothing happened with Star Wars. It's kind of hard for us to wrap our minds around it now, but back in the ancient days of 1991, Star Wars was considered a dead franchise.
Was it really?
Yeah, it had been 8 years since Return of the Jedi came out. So for 8 years, there had been no movie, and there was no movie on the horizon.
Okay.
The next Star Wars film wouldn't be out for another 8 years, until like 1999 was when Phantom Menace came out. So that was still just a gleam in George Lucas's eyes. Now, Star Wars had been sustained by the Marvel comic book, which was really well done. However, as a licensed franchise thing, Marvel had to split the profits with Fox and Lucasfilm. So although it sold very well for Marvel, they never made all that much money off of it. And with no new Star Wars film out or on the horizon, sales began to dwindle, so Marvel let it go. They dropped it completely.
Yeah.
So in '91, you had no movies, certainly no television shows at that point. You couldn't even dream of putting Star Wars on TV. Special effects alone would make it absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
No comic books. Now, Delray Books had the right to do Star Wars books and putting out hardcovers and paperbacks, and some of them were really good, but none of them were fantastic. Star Wars fans considered the books to be okay, but they were kind of mediocre. None of them set the world on fire. Even the ones that had authors who were kind of recognized, they just didn't. And part of that was that Lucasfilm put them under a really strict contract, which kept them from making up too many of their own original characters.
Mm-hmm.
They had to use the characters as they appeared on the screen, and all the stories had to take place during or around the motion pictures, the 3 Star Wars movies.
Oh, wow.
So they couldn't go beyond that. They couldn't go backwards in time, they couldn't go forwards in time. Everything had to happen within the context of the 3 films.
And that was part of like the things he told them they had to do.
Yeah, those are the rules they had to follow. And when you have really talented science fiction writers, asking them to write in a straitjacket, because the movies as presented gave us a really narrow, limited view of this universe.
Yeah.
There's so much we just don't know, we didn't know. But there are like 2 lights in the darkness that saved Star Wars.
Okay.
The first one was West End Games. I'm sure you've never heard of them.
Never, no.
That's not surprising. Unless you're a hardcore tabletop, RPG fan, you've never heard of West End Games. They had gotten the license for Star Wars at a time when it was cheap,
Okay.
because no one else really wanted it. And they kept putting out Star Wars supplements, and Lucasfilm and Lucas himself were very generous with letting them do almost whatever they wanted with the Star Wars universe. Now, if you want to play a character in Star Wars, and the Star Wars early computer games were terrible. None of them, Star Wars would eventually do games that pushed the envelope, but in those days, all the Star Wars games were arcade games, and they were not that exciting. I spent hours and hours in the Death Star trench. I never blew up the damn thing, so, there you go. So basically, West End Games sat down and they said, okay, we're characters in the Star Wars universe, what do we do? Now, for instance, the Empire is fighting the Rebellion. Now, the Empire in the films has basically 2 ships.
Yeah.
You have TIE fighters and you have Star Destroyers. And that was essentially it. There were 1 or 2 other ships that appeared in the background in big long shots and no one knew anything about them. You only had 2 ships that we even talked about on screen, and they still had no stats. We're talking about like a D&D version of Star Wars here. So you're really going to want to know, well, how fast is my ship?
Yeah.
How fast can my ship do the Kessel Run? Or how fast is that Star Destroyer? And what is hyperspace anyway? If you're doing a movie, you can just say, let's jump to hyperspace, and you hit a button, and special effects provides a blurry starscape, and suddenly you're in hyperspace. And you never have to stop to explain to the audience what's going on. Even in a book, you can fudge on things. The audience will automatically accept, yes, they're in hyperspace. But in a role-playing game, if it's your job to get to hyperspace before your ship is blown up, you have to know the rules. Is it hard to jump to hyperspace? Is it easy to jump to hyperspace?
Yeah.
And how fast is hyperspace?
Mm-hmm.
Now, hyperspace is an actual concept some physicists think might actually be possible, although it's still totally theoretical. But mathematically, the idea of a way of traveling not faster than light in our universe, but in technically another reality, hyperspace, might actually happen. But there are no rules for it. Mm-hmm. And Lucasfilm was in no mood to actually create rules. But West End Games had to. Like, you watch the first Star Wars film, A New Hope. They jump on the Millennium Falcon, they leave Tatooine, and they're heading towards where they expect Alderaan to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they get there.
Yeah.
Now, how long does that take?
You never really know.
They don't tell you.
Yeah.
I guess they're on the Millennium Falcon for hours, maybe days.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he has bunk somewhere they can sleep in. You never see a bed. Are they there for a week? Now, all the training Luke gets in the Force happens during that time. If he only spends like an hour and a half on the Millennium Falcon, then Obi-Wan barely had time to say the things we saw him say on screen, and nothing off screen.
Yeah.
So Luke knows as little about the Force going into it as we do, basically. He's completely ignorant. But if they spent a day or 2 in hyperspace,
Yeah.
then there would have been time to get more training.
So I guess it's kind of up to like the people to kind of. figure it
Exactly.
out.
So
Yeah.
West End Games had to figure out how long a hyperspace jump is in real time if you're on board the ship, and how far can you go in hyperspace. Like one of the things they invented was you have to limit it, or everybody would be in hyperspace all the time.
Mhm.
And one thing they said was to make it more difficult for the players, you couldn't jump into hyperspace when you're in the gravity well of a planet.
Wow.
Now, the movies never said that, but that's such a cool idea. It became a part of the Star Wars universe. Until the most recent films was J.J. Abrams forgot that. But until J.J. Abrams, if you're Han Solo, you're fleeing a planet, you have to get away from the gravity well of that planet before you can jump to hyperspace, or it just won't work.
Mhm.
And if you jump out of hyperspace, you don't have your coordinates right, and you appear too near a planet, you'll destroy it instantly. You stand no chance of survival.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so suddenly hyperspace had rules, things you could do and things you couldn't do when you were in hyperspace. West End Games invented the interdiction ships. Now we know they have artificial gravity in the Star Wars universe because they're in space, but they have gravity.
Mhm.
And you just assume they have artificial gravity. Star Trek does, so Star Wars does too. Nobody has a problem with that. But if they can make their own gravity fields, why can't the Empire have a ship that generates a low gravity field around themselves that stops smugglers from escaping? So you can't jump to hyperspace when you're near one of these ships. So the interdiction ships were sent in to make blockades to stop smugglers from getting into Imperial planets.
That's cool.
It's a super cool idea. Cooler than anything the movies ever did, because the movies never really approached things from a tactical standpoint. They didn't have to.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of combat or maneuvering in Star Wars.
Mhm.
So West End Games, the brilliant geniuses at West End Games had to sit down and figure all this out from scratch. And for the most part, everything that they thought of was adopted by Lucasfilm. A few things were left by the wayside, but almost everything West End Games created, this tiny company you've never heard of, these
No.
creators are totally unknown to the wider universe, but they're responsible for creating much of the Star Wars universe that we know of. Like Twi'leks, the people with the long things on their heads.
Yeah.
They're really cool. You see them at science fiction conventions all the time. Originally, that was just Jabba's dancing girl.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Her name was Una, I think. And she didn't have a race. No one knew where she came from. She didn't have a background. She was just there. In a film, that's really all you have to do.
Yeah.
But people wanted to know who these people were. The Star Wars scripts are full of references to things like Walrus Man. He's a guy who has big tusks, like a walrus.
Mhm.
And that's all the script has to say about it. The guy only has 2 lines of dialogue. But West End Games actually sat down and gave names and alien races to every single person in the cantina.
Wow.
And every single person in Jabba's throne room has a name, a race, and a background. And they wrote short stories about most of them. And many of them were later printed in book form, along with new stories that Lucasfilm commissioned, all following the continuity West End Games had created.
That's cool. That's really cool.
It is amazingly cool. West End Games did a lot of great stuff. Now, Lucas, needless to say, still wanted to do more movies.
Mhm.
But at this point, Lucasfilm was more or less a dead operation. There was nothing new coming out. The Del Rey books, as I said, were not spectacular. I mean, they're good books, but they weren't game changers. So, Lucasfilm approached Del Rey about going on the 3 movies for the first time.
Mhm.
They're going to license an author to go ahead and do new stories of what happens after Return of the Jedi,
Yeah.
which is pretty spectacular. And so the person who was picked for was a guy named Timothy Zahn. Zahn is famous for writing what they call military science fiction.
Okay.
Combat stories set in the future. He had kind of a harder, more gritty, realistic setting than Star Wars. But he was a huge Star Wars fan, as no science fiction people were at the time. And they approached him about writing not one book, he was trying to do a trilogy of books, which was kind of a huge thing at the time. It was also an enormous responsibility, being the very first writer. He's sitting alone in his room with his typewriter, creating a new Star Wars canon for a new universe. In an interview he gave for the 20th anniversary release of his first book, he mentioned he felt the pressure. He seriously thought about saying no, because if he screws up at the end of his career as a writer,
Yeah.
he'll just be the guy who ruined Star Wars forever. And he didn't want that on his tombstone.
No, definitely not. No one ever does.
But fortunately for us, he said yes. He said he took the responsibility, he took the challenge. And the first thing that Lucasfilm did was send him a whole box full of supplements from West End Games.
Wow. That's
And said, here, use this. And so that way all the ships and some of the supporting characters and so forth all came directly from the West End Games. That's how important West End games was. And by the way, although all the supplements came out in the 90s and they're out of print by decades, it's still so popular that for its anniversary they released the original rule book again.
Wow.
The old D6 format. It's available in hardcover. Our library doesn't have it, but I know it's out there. So yes, Timothy Zahn agreed to take on the challenge of creating new Star Wars stories. And at that time, like I said, no Star Wars book had been that popular. And he was the only game in town when it came to creating things for Star Wars. The book he came out with was called Heir to the Empire. It's been printed and reprinted many times. This is very close to the original cover. It came out as a hardcover, and the original price on it is now $15 for this one, which is a reprint. It's been reprinted like 20 times. They were so nervous about sales on the book that instead of charging like 15 or 16 bucks for it, they came out at like around $12, which is super cheap for a hardcover book.
Yeah.
They probably only broke even on that because that's how terrified they were that it wouldn't sell.
Wow.
But it turns out they needn't have worried. Within a few weeks of hitting bookstores, hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, which no Star Wars book had ever done before. It was suddenly like an international phenomenon. Bookstores could not keep it in the shelves. The entire like 10,000 print run was sold out in less than a week. It went back to print again and again. It was so popular, when a new shipment was coming in, Star Wars fans would stand there in the bookstores and buy them right from the box before they got put out. They would buy them that quickly. That's how phenomenal it was. Timothy Zahn took everything West End Games had done and ran with it. He sat down and figured out a lot of things as to how the universe works. He introduced a lot of things that wound up being sticking things in the universe that people still talk about. He coined the term Dark Jedi. He invented the first Jedi who wasn't, Obi-Wan
Yeah.
and possibly Luke.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan in the first 3 movies was the only Jedi we've ever seen. And so now I got to see, oh yes, there's a lot more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
The evil, like Dark Jedi in this one is a little crazy, and he's force powerful, and he's not to be messed with. Now, the big character that Timothy Zahn introduced is someone who would go on to become a huge part of Star Wars legends, and that's Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn was a great villain. If you're going to create new villains for Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a pretty high bar to set, with the Emperor and Darth Vader already having been created.
Yeah.
You may have noticed in the most recent set of movies, they didn't reach that bar.
Mm-hmm.
They created villains that were vastly inferior to the Emperor and Darth Vader. In fact, brought back the Emperor, which is a real sign of I have no idea what to do, so I'll bring back an old villain that already died 30 years ago. Villains are hard to come up with sometimes, but he came up with a fantastic character. Grand Admiral Thrawn is a Chiss. He's from a home world. His planet is off in these sort of unexplored regions. It's not an unknown part of space, but it was never really conquered by the Empire. Everybody knows it's there, but he's away from all the galactic politics.
Mm-hmm.
He leaves his home world for reasons that varied, because they've written 2 different origin stories for him. I'll get to that in a minute. But he winds up joining the Empire and rising in rank. He's a military strategist. The one thing we really never saw the Empire doing was anything that was really strategically brilliant.
Yeah.
And he is a genius at tactics. He's a chess player on the battlefield. When he wants to destroy an enemy, he studies them. He studies the culture of a planet before he blows them up. He has artworks and sculptures left behind from planets where he's actually wiped out the entire race that created them, and that sculpture he has that taught him how that race thought and how they looked at the world, gave him the cues he needed to destroy them.
So he pretty much he knew the victims before he killed them. Kind
Yeah.
Of. Yeah.
It's incredibly creepy. He's really evil and he's really unique. He also is not a Force user, but he understands the Force and he's comfortable with it. Now, in one version of his story, and again it differs, in one version of the story, he thought the Emperor's plan of coming up with a second Death Star was really dumb. The idea of putting all of your finances, all the money and all the equipment that you have into building a second Death Star, after the first one is blown up really super easily.
Yeah.
Thrawn, from a strategist's point of view, basically said, well, that's a dumb idea. And the Emperor didn't want to hear that. So Thrawn was exiled way far out. Go explore the unknown section of space, Thrawn, so I won't have to look at you for a while, is what the Emperor more or less said to him. Which is why he never appeared in the original series of movies.
Yeah.
He was way out there in space, you know, conquering new planets for the Emperor that, you know, we'll never see. And there's also an idea that's been floating around the Star Wars universe, which I'm not sure they've made it canon or not. The only people that really rose in ranks inside the Empire were human. You never really saw aliens. One difference between the Empire and the Rebellion was the Rebellion was very eclectic. People from all different races, humans and non-humans, working together, as the Empire was almost entirely human.
Yeah.
And so although he was a Chiss and he looked human except for his blue skin, he was still an alien. And so his rise to the top was really an incredible stroke of his proof of his brilliance. The fact that as an alien he was still able to rise to become a Grand Admiral, which is a term that Timothy Zahn invented. He has no idea what it really means. It probably means Fleet Admiral, that he should be in charge of an entire fleet. But he only has one ship, the Chimera, because that was what the Emperor gave him. I guess he had to reward him after all his success, so he made him a Grand Admiral, then did give him his own fleet. There's almost no question if he had actually been, you know, at Endor, things would have ended very badly for our heroes. Yeah, so he forms an alliance with the Dark Jedi. He finds a way to get around Luke's force powers. He forms a treacherous alliance of various like smugglers and ne'er-do-wells to work with him. Basically, when the Empire was destroyed in Return of the Jedi, everybody knew that it wasn't really destroyed.
Yeah.
It conquered like, you know, hundreds, maybe thousands of planets. We really don't know. But just killing one guy doesn't destroy a whole power structure. Their power structure is falling apart. But pretty much like everybody who could command a starship suddenly thought that he was not going to be the new emperor, or at least the new like governor general of this planet. He can do whatever he wanted because no one could stop him. So the New Republic, as another term that Timothy Zahn coined, the New Republic, the job was to run around and mop up all of these like would-be captains and admirals who want to take over again, one by one. And it was a long, tedious work, while at the same time they're trying to draw up a constitution. So Leia's being drawn in two different directions. He also allows Leia to become pregnant.
Wow.
Not with one kid who will betray her later, but with twins. Although the new continuity that we eventually would see would have no connection to this continuity, something I'll again get to in part 2. They could allow Leia to grow up enough that she now is about to give birth to twins, was something that was very important in Star Wars. We weren't sure whether they'd really be allowed to grow and change like real people do, because they are still iconic characters. But they do. Zahn has a good ear for dialogue. When Han Solo says something in Timothy Zahn's books, you can hear Harrison Ford's growly voice saying it. He really catches their dialogue. Luke is more confident after Empire Strikes Back, but he's just as conflicted and troubled as he's always been. Because he still feels he's not ready. After all he's done, he's still just starting out. And he's the only Jedi in the universe, and no one really understands him. His sister has force powers. He established Leia does have force powers. But Leia had to choose between serving the New Republic and getting training to become a better Jedi, and she chose the New Republic, basically. She chose to help build something that could create peace for millions of intelligent beings, rather than trying to pursue the Jedi path, which is something that will haunt various versions of Leia's character through the different media. But Thrawn was an awesome character, fantastic villain. The trilogy that Timothy Zahn wrote were all bestsellers. They were huge. They absolutely burned up the bookstores. Every major library has these copies of the book. And Zahn went on to write other books in the series that would continue on with the various things that he created in this one, expanding the universe more and more. It became the Star Wars expanded universe. Now, they went back with previous stories set back in the past. When the prequel movies came out, nothing in the prequels really contradicted anything that happened in the books. So Zahn went back and he wrote stories about young, Grand Admiral Thrawn. He was just starting out, and how he became involved with the lives of Obi-Wan and Anakin and so forth. There's the Outward Bound flight, which he name drops in this, and he admits at the time he had no idea what Outward Bound really was. He later went back and wrote an entire book about that expedition that wound up costing the lives of a lot of people. And that's the setup for things that had already happened in his books that happened later. Now, when the new continuity was invented for the most recent trilogy of movies, that was very divisive for fandom. It was one of the things that did it, because they decided that everything that had happened in the books and the comic books after Zahn took over really didn't happen. Like, it didn't have twins. Originally, there was no Grand Admiral Thrawn, but fans are upset. They created a totally new continuity, but some ideas are so good that you just can't kill them. So it wasn't very long before, surprise, Thrawn popped up again. The Clone Wars series is definitely set in the continuity of the last 3 movies. Its continuity is tied in very tightly with Lucasfilm and so forth. But when you need a villain, and you've already got Thrawn lying around unused now in this new continuity, so they brought him back for Clone Wars. And Zahn, when you write for a franchise, you don't own your own characters. He invented Grand Admiral Thrawn. He's most associated with him. Of course, he doesn't own him. Theoretically, Lucasfilm can ask anyone to write a Thrawn story. But they know they had Timothy Zahn come back, write a new origin for Thrawn, and go through what happened to him in the current continuity. In theory, Thrawn is still running around because there's never been a story written in which he dies. So we still don't know the end of his story. He could still be there in the Star Wars universe, but J.J. Abrams chose not to use him for the last couple of movies. Oh well. That's probably all the time we have right now. Are you enjoying this?
I am. I like this a lot. You're telling me stuff I never knew before. So.
It is such a huge universe.
Yeah,
you see the movies, the TV shows, and you're happy with it because they're really well done. But there's so much more. As a science fiction writer, Timothy Zahn looked at Star Wars and what else can I do with this universe? Where can I go from here? He wasn't satisfied with what Lucas had given us. Next time we're talking more about the Star Wars extended universe. And my library has here this book, which is the essential reader's companion to Star Wars. When this book was printed, they already knew that movies are coming out that would contradict everything they had done in the books. So this is now a record of a lost universe. This is what the Star Wars universe could have been like. It catalogs like basically every book that was put out, where it belongs in continuity, starting with the early days of the Clone Wars and going up to the extended universe period. The children of like Luke and Leia, or children of Han and Leia. Now Luke also had kids because there was a kick-ass female character created, Mara Jade, that Timothy Zahn created. One of the best female characters in Star Wars, so amazingly cool. We'll talk all about her and her role in Star Wars when we come back next time. Until then, I am Ed from Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
And I'm Miss Gabby.
Everybody out there, take care of yourself and be safe, and we'll see you next time on Book Talking.